Assassin's Creed Valhalla's release date is fast approaching. Every year I think about doing this series that I want to get started now, every time a new Assassin's Creed comes out. Now, I actually have the facilities, I have the tools, and I have the time to be able to do it. So let's look back at Assassin's Creed from the beginning to the current position, at the story evolution, mechanic evolution, even the game style evolution, and see what made Assassin's Creed great. Now, it's going to take a couple of episodes to get into a flow of things, and I'm not sure how we're going to approach Ezio, because he is the only protagonist to have multiple mainline games. So we'll see whether it's a single episode covering Ezio or whether it's multiples. But there's one who comes before that, one who started the whole thing way back in 2007 on the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and of course the best version of that game on PC. And that assassin is none other than Altair ibn al-Ahad. But first, we have to go back in time, back to 2003 and the revival of the Jordan Mechner series from the 80s. Sands of Time kickstarted a trilogy that is still spoken of in such high regard to this day. It brought in parkour elements that have tried to be copied throughout. It brought in new ways to bring back health, new ways to traverse the world, interesting combat that was revamped throughout the series, and a storyline that was unlike anything else we'd ever come across, because suddenly we as the player could interact with time. But this wasn't the thing that kept people latching onto the series. That whole leap of faith idea that came with being able to reverse any mistake that you made was secondary to the brilliant mechanics that you used to navigate the world. When the series finished with the Two Thrones, rounding out the prince's journey and the Sands of Time's story themselves, Ubisoft wondered what to do next, where to take the Prince of Persia series. And as they looked into real history from the Persian era, discovered the Hashashin and what they did in reality, how they served the sultans and kings of Persia, something new and something darker was born from a want to bring Prince of Persia to the next generation of consoles. It was too dark for the fairy tale type story that the Prince had brought, with only mild horror within it. And so, the name changed. And rather than the Prince of Persia, we ended up with the Order of Assassins based heavily upon the Hashashin, and a protagonist that many would call two-dimensional. But with hindsight, you should know, is reserved and stoic. And it kick-started a series that would surpass the one that inspired it. My name is Doragon, and this is the first of my Assassin's Creed retrospectives. By today's standards, Assassin's Creed is nothing special. But at the time of its release in 2007, with its go anywhere, climb anything mantra, nothing else was like it. We'd seen with Prince of Persia previously what a solid platformer could bring to the mass market. Mario had been doing it for years, but Prince of Persia matured that formula somewhat. Assassin's Creed wanted to change it again, and make platforming more integral than the aim. It wanted to be this pure, underlying mechanic that informs every other action taken within the game. And when you go back and play Assassin's Creed now, and consider that it was made 13 years ago, 2 generations of console ago by the time most people are watching this video, it achieved something that nobody thought was possible with the hardware that was around at the time. In keeping with that change the game mantra, Ubisoft also changed the way it told the story. The actual protagonist is a modern-day bartender, set 1,000 years later than the guy that you're actually controlling and playing for most of your time in game. It was unlike anything that had ever been done before. And whilst it seems shallow on first playthrough, the execution is actually perfect when you think on it. The protagonist that we play as for little sections doesn't understand what is happening almost as much as we don't. And we go on this journey of discovery with Desmond through the life of Altair to understand exactly what is happening in this universe. And it isn't until those final few moments where everything comes together and suddenly the understanding of this narrative choice is brought to the foreground. The story of Assassin's Creed can be viewed much in the same way as the narrative style. Shallow upon first glance, but with much more depth as you dig. For many folks who've only played the game once, it's either a story of redemption or a story of good versus evil. It's in fact both, and so much more. It's a commentary on corporate power in a modern world. Abstergo aims to gain pieces of Eden, to put in satellites above the earth, to control the will of the populace. Noble goals for peace, but through pure control of people. A theme that is sadly echoed in the modern world that we actually live in. You look at the power of corporations over governments, and they can almost make laws that benefit themselves. Assassin's Creed was almost warning us of this 13 years ago in the form of interactive media. Add in the revelations of how Ubisoft executives have been acting and have lost their jobs and livelihoods for. Assassin's Creed told a story that if it were in any other medium would be heralded for its foreboding. A brilliant story is something almost required in video games of the modern era. But what also matters is how you experience that story. And if the gameplay doesn't hold up, people are not going to go to the end. And the gameplay is where Assassin's Creed fell down slightly, even in 2007. The problem for most people, and even myself, an avid defender of this game, is the repetitive nature of what you have to do in Assassin's Creed to advance the story. It is broken up into areas, assassination contracts, and discovering the information you need to find out where that contract will be and how you can kill them. The problem you face is that every single contract has the same options to find that information. You have a social stealth option where you sit on a bench and overhear a conversation. You have a beat-em-up contract for somebody in the inner circle of this target. You have a couple of other options along the way, but once again, they are the same as every single contract. And when you have 12 of these contracts to go through, that means 12 times sitting on a bench and hearing a conversation, 12 beating up situations. It becomes tedious and tiresome. And then combat, when you enter into it, is tough to swallow. Even in 2007, coming after The Prince of Persia, which had this beautiful, fluid combat, Assassin's Creed was a parry system that required the AI to attack you. But the AI was not what you expect with the likes of the Souls or Ghost of Tsushimas of today. It was slow, it was clunky, and if you had a target on the floor, there were often times you couldn't attack them. For many, this was simply too much to get over. The constant repetition, the clunky mechanics and combat, as beautiful and wonderful as the game and story were, it wasn't engaging for many people to get to the end. This led many commentators and reviewers to call the game bad or weak. And whilst I can understand their viewpoints, I think it's a crying shame that this turned many people off what was the bedrock of one of the most successful franchises to grace video gaming. Most of the elements that are in that original game, vast, sweeping, beautifully rendered open worlds, towers to unlock sections of the map, social and area stealth, crouching behind things and blending in with crowds. These have been picked up and adapted by other developers for other open world titles. The bedrock of the open world as we know it today was very much laid down by Assassin's Creed in 2007. Developers understand people want that now, and they pursue that level of perfection, all because of what was started in this first Assassin's Creed game.
The original game is not a masterpiece. We are not talking about the greatest game ever created here. What we are talking about is a foundation that has paved the way for every open world game following it. A foundation that has built one of the greatest franchises gaming has ever seen, that churned out installment year upon year, and still somehow has a fan base, with changing landscapes, changing protagonists, even changing game styles. From this, a very parkour action-based title, through to the RPG mythical things that we have now. Assassin's Creed should be heralded for the basis that it's set for everything else following it. A masterpiece it is not, but a brilliant foundation it surely is. I'd like to thank you all very much for tuning in. My name is Doragon. This is the first in my series of the Assassin's Creed retrospectives. And until next time, folks, take care.